Is the regular meeting of the Ordinance Committee on September 29, 2015. Ms. Wong, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Councilmember Rouse.
Here.
Councilmember Murillo.
Here.
And Councilmember Hotchkiss.
Here. And are there any of the members of the public that would like to speak on any of my items not on the agenda? See none, we'll close public comment and go to the staff report. Mr. Dayton.
Good afternoon, Ordinance Committee members. We're here to talk about car share today, and I just wanted to give you a little bit background on where it came from. You'll recall that we did the general plan update in recent years, and in the final EIR, or Environmental Impact Report, we found that there were going to be traffic impacts as a result of our incremental build-out over time. This slide just shows what those impacts are. There's about 13 intersections that were impacted in 2008, and that is projected to go up to 27, plus or minus. The 27, the reason those numbers on the second column to the right don't add up to 27 is some are AM peak hour and some are PM peak hour, and the total number of intersections is 27. Some are both. And so what the council did was talk about, okay, so how do we mitigate that over time? And one of the mitigation measures that was identified and put into the city policies was to do a car share tool that would help in reduce congestion and improve the use of alternative modes of transportation. And so what is car share? What is it? And essentially it's a very easy way to rent a car and to have a car accessible to you and next to your household or business very readily. It's a club membership, so what people do is they become members of CarShare, and they pay on an annual basis, and then they schedule for use of the car. The use of the car is typically on an hourly basis, unlike a rent, and that's where it differs from a rental agency where you rent a car on a daily basis. This is an easily accessible rental on a hourly basis. So what happens is you park the cars in residential neighborhoods or in the downtown garages, and we've got two customers. We've got a resident that's living there. They've got a car share membership. They subscribe and say, hey, I want to take the car at this time. They take their key fob. They swipe it over the windshield of the car, and the car door opens. The keys are inside. They use it for their trip, and then they can return it right where it is. The second user would be someone who's coming from another city, Los Angeles or another place in the United States, and they have a car share membership where they live, and then they, on vacation, use it as well. So those are the car share types and how that works. The objectives are of the EIR and the mitigation program is we want to use car share to fulfill that mitigation program. And then we want to also add to the tools we have to create alternative modes. I'm going to talk a little bit more how that works. Decrease congestion, an obvious one that the council wanted to do with the general plan, even though we have impacts to decrease congestion, and then to expand our choices for residents and visitors alike. The Transportation Research Board and the National Association of Science have some findings regarding car share, and here's what they've found with different operators in different cities is that each car share will actually displace 15 personally owned vehicles. How does that work? That's a great question, because how do you get to there? And this is how it works, is typically the people who are interested in car share are people who already use alternative modes of transportation. They're already using them. And what they're not willing to do is they're not willing to they want to keep their car that they have, even though they're using alternative transportation or a second car. They want to keep it. Let's say you're in a family household and the spouses need to go separate ways and they need cars that day, right? So they're holding on that car for that situation where they're going to need both or they need one. What car share does is it enables the people in those situations to have a car available to them at a very low cost so that they can get rid of the higher cost, about $5,000 a year, of owning the second car. And so then it's available to them. They can shed a car from their family and have one available really close for those situations where you actually need it. Members report a 46% increase in transit and usage and drive 40% miles fewer. Why is that? Because when you've now shed your car, now the choice to drive is a financial decision. Before they had their car, they've already paid their $5,000 to have their car every year, right? It's in their driveway or on the street parked. Now it's not, and now if they go to the car share, they're going to have to pay for that. So they're for trips, they are better planners on use of alternative modes when they have to pay to drive. So that's how that happens. Members report cost savings of $500 per year versus car ownership. So there's a reduction in fees, and then also cities are reporting that they're freeing up parking spaces, and that happens by lowering demand. And in the places we're thinking about, which I'll show you, putting these cars, that would likely happen because there's a lot of people parked residentially on the street. And so as we move to car share, depending upon the success of the program, if people do shed cars, they're more than likely going to be parked on the street. So where would car share be and how much? We're looking at initially, we think about 10 cars. We really don't know until we get an RFP from a company to tell us exactly what they are recommending. But this is what we're thinking, two in garages downtown for mainly tourism driven. Lot 6 and 10 both have availability. In other words, we wouldn't want to put a car share in a garage that is full. Locations on street are to be determined, but here's some ideas of where they may be looking. This is census tract information specifically based on how many people bicycle in our street, and the darker the area of that census tract, the more likely they are to, or they say, according to the American Community Survey, that they do bicycle to work. This would be to work. So the darker areas, I think the second to the darkest is 10 to 20% bicycle to work. So you can see some areas like right in here between Mission and Mitchell-Trena, and here on the west side, and then on the lower east side, we have a lot of cycling. So cars may be placed in these areas, and then if you look at the areas where people are more likely to walk, in these areas right here, this area we think shows up because of Westmont. So that's kind of an anomaly, but here are our biggest walkers. They're in the downtown and then on the shoulders. So in these areas, we think that car share companies are going to want to put car shares on the car share locations, parking on the street. What happens is it goes on the street, and it would be closer to the corner. The reason we delayed bringing it to you last time is because we were working out the street sweeping, because most of the streets that we would have car share would have street sweeping on them. And so the way we worked that out is we would make the car share companies and hold them accountable to sweep the spaces. More than likely, the cars will be gone when the street sweeping comes by, because if the car isn't gone, the program is not really working. These cars are intended to turn over all day long and be in use all day long. If they're not turning over all day long, then the car company more likely is going to take that one away because it's not going to be economically viable. So again, require the car company to maintain the cleanliness of that space when the car is gone. If it is gone, the street sweeper will go ahead and sweep it. The signs will be moved so the car share vehicles will not be illegal. And then we will also have a pedestrian signage for people who are wondering, okay, what's going on with this car share, to advertise them and say, hey, would you like to sign up, and information on how to do that. Where is car share now in the region? Well, it's completely surrounding the city from UCSB, Isla Vista, City College, Westmont, and we already have 2 cars at the airport. The picture there, these two cars are cars in Isla Vista, and you can see these 2 spaces both have towaway. This is for a car share zone, and so it looks like they're just cars on the street, but there's signage to identify that those are indeed car share. There's nothing really, there's not a big announcement on the car that this is a car share, because it's just like renting a car, and the rental cars don't do that either. So for implementation, this is the stop. The reason we need an ordinance is because to get this going, we need to have an ordinance in place that allows us to lease the public space for these companies. It'll be an amount the city will collect, so we're getting revenue for the space. We'd have to negotiate that, but we'll be getting a revenue stream from the space, and that's why the ordinance was required to get this program going. And best place to put these is right next to residents, and then in the downtown where visitors can use it. Next step would be to release, after we get the ordinance approved through council, we would have an RFP process, RFQ. Okay, so what car company can offer us the best service for our residents, and with the parameters that we need to see and the maintenance of the street for the sweeping, and then we would select a car share partner, and then hopefully launch next year. We will not know how successful the program is. We think it will be successful, but we won't know how successful until it's actually in business and we see either the company's profiting or they're not. If they're profiting, they will add more cars and as many cars as they can to cover the demand. Or if it's not working in a certain site, they can remove the signage and pull back. So that concludes my presentation. We have Peter Brown, who's worked very hard on this ordinance, along with Tava Ostringer from the Attorney's Office, who's been very instrumental in helping us get to this point.
A couple of questions, Mr. Dayton. When we did the general plan update, I remember this as being part of the alternative modes that I thought were part of the adaptive management program. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And those were to be brought up when there were certain triggers that said it's time to move these tools forward into our repertoire. Is there a trigger that is bringing this forward at this point in time? Is there some kind of a mechanism that happened in the community that says it's time for one of these alternate modes?
I wouldn't say there is a trigger that said, okay, now we've reached a certain amount of congestion. I think that staff believes, TCC, Transportation Circulation Committee has been asking for this. Other people have been asking for this. This is probably one of the easiest things that we can do and offers immediate service to all users and has immediate benefit, easiest to get up and running. So we thought it's pretty simple to do. It didn't take a lot of staff work to get to this point.
Okay, very good. I have a fair amount of questions and comments because obviously we've talked about this for a long time, but I was going to go to my colleagues and see if either of you had any questions. Ms. Murillo.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I'm looking at the local programs. They're student focused, and I'm just wondering what you've heard from a city sort of focused residential, what you're talking about. You must have talked to other jurisdictions that matches our population and residential use more closely. Is this Mr. Brown?
Councilmember Maria, I'm going to have Peter Brown answer that question.
Thank you.
Chair Rouse, Councilmember Murillo. Indeed, we spoke with about 7 different cities. The car share companies, as you noted, that are in town are focused on university campuses for a couple reasons. One is it was easy for them to work with those campuses. They didn't need an ordinance because the campus has authority of how they use their right-of-way. And the second reason is, as you note, the student population, similar to what Mr. Dayton said, is typically a population that is accustomed to multiple modes of transportation, and so they have successful programs. You'll notice in your staff report, Santa Monica, Los Angeles, Pasadena, West Hollywood, Berkeley, San Francisco, and Sacramento were all noted because I personally spoke with representatives from those cities about how their programs are working. And the other final comment that I would make in terms of what Mr. Dayton noted is there's a high level of flexibility with a lot of these companies now. When we spoke with one in particular, they said they like to have their cars rented out between 12 and 16 hours a day. That's a good amount of hours in a day for a car to be in use. And when they do not reach that threshold and they begin to run into, say, economic concerns, they can pull back cars. So that, I think staff in that sense feels pretty comfortable because if there's success, we know the cars are going out. And if they're not being rented out, we can certainly pull back almost at no cost to the city.
Mr. Brown, what information did you gather about initiating a program and then how long it takes people to jump on board or outreach? How do you let people know the program's in place, and then how long does it take for, for there to be a mass of participation? Please.
Okay, so Councilmember Mario, what we found out was that most of the time it's pretty quick adoption. And there's two reasons for that. One is the successful programs have the cars readily available and visible to the public. So, in other words, if there's not a car share vehicle located in my neighborhood, I'm not apt to see it as I come and go from my home or be wanting to use it. However, in those cases where we have data that supports that the usage would be viable, almost everyone in that neighborhood is going to see those vehicles as they come and go from their home. So that's the quickest and easiest way to get the word out. The car share companies also typically do some advertising about which cities they're in. They have a vested interest in promoting it. And of course, through our, the city does a pretty good job in blasting information, social media, our website. So we feel pretty confident that we could get the word out fairly easily and quickly.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Well, this could be a real cost saver for some people in the residences. That would seem to be the driving force behind it, and that part is good. What kind of signage would we use? Pretty much what they've done at Isla Vista.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Hotchkiss, we want to work with the company, but what we're envisioning is a two-way signage. One signage is obviously towaway. We don't want people parking. You don't want to come back
Right.
To a space that's filled. That's not good for the operation. And then another sign is toward the sidewalk, appropriate with ABR and signage regulation, but something that advertises the service and the purpose with a place to get information, that kind of signage.
You said on the sidewalk, though?
Yeah, so the pole, one sign would be facing the motorists who are passing the streets who don't park here, and then the signage facing the sidewalk for pedestrians who are going by who can see what the program is, get the website to get more information.
Right,
and
but it's a pole thing, though.
It's a pole.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it's a pole.
Yeah. Do we know how long it's taken in the past? Locally, we've got Enterprise does this, actually, and Zipcar. I don't know others locally, but we sort of got two in place already that could, tomorrow put this into effect. Do we know how long we will ask them or suggest, or they will suggest they test it, or maybe we just leave that open in the RFP?
I think we do, and I think we work with them. I think there's enough unknowns to just kind of keep it fluid, and of course, there's a benefit to the car share company and to the city if it does well. So we'll be trying to.
And do we control the number? I mean, if they suddenly want to go crazy, do we say, oh, no, 20 is too many? Or
We would imagine that the agreement would involve parameters so that we have say as to and checks and balances so they're not just going wild without city approval of how and where they put the next cars. We have to be able to manage that. Derek Bailey, our traffic engineer, has to be involved, and we have to make sure it's done well. And the spacing is something that is appropriate and we want to see.
the notes speak of on-street stalls. Is that basically a parking space is what you're talking
That's
about?
correct.
Okay. Could the city participate and offer corporate membership to employees? They do have corporate programs with these Zipcar deals.
Committee Member Hotchkiss, you're correct. The city has that option. Other cities have done that and found that to be beneficial. And certainly when we spoke with a few of the car share companies, they did offer that as an additional service for public agencies or private companies that have stalls nearby their workplace where their memberships are available for their employees as well.
And can people who hear about this request in their neighborhood a program? For instance, somebody on the east side says, God, I love this, but we don't have one over here. They work directly with the car share company?
They would work with the city, I believe, in order to determine how the program would work. I mean, obviously, it's a partnership, right? It's a partnership between the community, the city, and the car share company that is selected if one is selected. So certainly they can request it. But I think similar to what Mr. Dayton mentioned, one of the main reasons why we're involved is because it is public right-of-way, and we want to make sure that we're using it the most appropriately. So certainly requests can come in, but we would need to evaluate those case by case.
Okay, I would suggest that we leave the burden of responsibility, not authority, but on the car share company. So they do the work, and then they come to us and say, okay, we'd like to do this, but they do the initial work. Yes, I can see you want to tell me something. Go ahead.
Chair Rouse, Member Hotchkiss. The ordinance specifically reserves the right to the number of and location of designation of spaces to the Public Works Director. So we could take those in through the Public Works Department, and then at some point we can address those through the request for proposals, or if the contract's in place, if an amendment is necessary, but we can deal with that through the contractual obligations. But the city is not obligated to give out more spaces than it can sustain.
Right, okay. I'm just trying to leave the burden of work not on the city. Finally, just to be specific about this, no public funding is involved, only receipt of money, correct?
That's correct. There will be staff time involved in managing it, and so that is a real cost that the city. We can't work on everything, so we'll
Say that again. I'm sorry.
The staff will have to manage this.
Yeah.
So there will be the ongoing cost of managing it, but what we'll do is we'll work on the revenues coming in to offset that.
Yeah, one should offset the other.
The street fund can be compensated for that cost.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm ready to move this forward, but you probably have some questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Well, you bring up a good point, Mr. Hotchkiss, and that in the staff report, policy C1.2 about personal transportation talks about specifically providing funding for share cost personal transportation options. Now, many of us, and Mr. Allen, I see out there, have been around a lot of our subsidized programs, bus pass programs and whatnot for a lot of years. A lot of money goes in annually to subsidize transit programs. So that caught my eye. Now I realize that this proposal has put forth is still in the dream stage, but one would assume that I wouldn't assume anything else, but I think the proposal we're looking for is completely privately funded. Outside of staff time.
Mr. Chair, that's correct. And the cost that Councilmember Hotchkiss was talking about is that the spaces will be leased to the company. So when they have a space that now they have installed the signing, so they work with us, but they'll install all the cost to install the signage, and then they will be leasing the space from us. So there's a revenue generation for that space.
Now, we talk about spaces. You named Lot 6 and Lot 10, which both also have monthly parkers that rent out cost per month. And I don't know if that's the pricing point you're using or some of the negotiated price for those spaces. But those are also done on a month-to-month basis until a threshold of, I believe, Mr. Allen, if I'm correct, 85% of capacity is reached, and then we have the ability to pull those spaces back. Now, clearly, a car share company isn't going to want to be, if they're here and they're successful, they're not going to want to fall into that threshold or into the threat of that threshold and have their business model interrupted by policy. Is there a way that we plan to address that?
Mr. Chair, absolutely. We will address that in the proposal, in that we will have we'll create the flexibility that we have if we need to move the car from the garage because the garage is overtaxed, is above the 85 percentile level. We will also be monitoring the statistics to try to determine how many cars each car share is taking off the streets. In other words, if now we have this influx of visitors, for instance, in speaking directly to the garage usage, this influx of visitors who are now using these cars a lot, right? And again, if the car is being used properly, it's actually not in the garage. It's actually outside. So if it's saving us parking, then we'll want to incorporate that data to see if it's reasonable to leave the car there or move it to a different place.
When you say visitors, I mean, when you say saving parking, you've got to be talking about residents because you're one for one on a visitor from out of town. I mean, you're in a space and out of a space and into another space. But if a resident chooses to not own a car or to have a second car, that would be the true savings. I mean, the reason why I bring this up is I'm a little concerned. I mean, we list all my favorite cities, compare ourselves with like Santa Monica, Los Angeles, Pasadena, West Hollywood, Berkeley. I mean, those are all fine, but those are also major urban areas that are much easier to adopt these kind of mass transit or alternative transportation plans too. Santa Barbara is still relatively lightly populated compared to those and does not have major metropolitan areas surrounding it. So I'm a little concerned. I like the idea. I'm concerned about the use of public spaces for a private enterprise, even though according to this, there will be a greater public good. But that's a question we've had before, especially when you have parking structures that have PBI paying memberships in terms of the stakeholders that are in the zones of benefit. Merchant concerns as we get towards the threshold. Is this really going to provide the best public benefit? So I don't know. I'm still kind of two minds because we have had this discussion before about how this might work. And I know in the original general plan update, we talked about a much more dramatic car share scenario that we had long and healthy discussions about back when. So I'm, like I said, I'm always concerned we use a major metropolitan area and try to use those techniques and overlay them here in Santa Barbara, which is not the major metropolitan area. So, and then my other question is, and I don't know, it's probably too early in the game to know this, has the advent of Uber affected this business plan at all for these car share companies? I mean, it's probably within the last year or so that Uber's really taken off, but Mr. Brown, you might have the answer for that.
Chair Rouse, members of the committee, that's a great point. What we're finding, the general term for these companies are transportation network companies, TNCs, and that's Lyft and Uber and any of those companies that are new and competing with basic taxi services. They have had an impact on some of these hourly car rental, car share programs. But at the same time, the car share companies have done fairly well in a lot of places, and they have a business model that is adapting to that. And I can give you one example. We didn't get into too much detail here, but there's a new program for car share called Point to Point. And this gets to another one of your questions about visitors. So let's say you have a Zipcar membership and you're coming to Santa Barbara or Los Angeles for a great Southern California vacation. If you know Zipcar is at the airport or in the downtown, you may not rent a car. You may not choose to take a car for 3 to 5 days for your trip. You may just use a Zipcar on an hour-by-hour basis. So in that case, we would not be bringing in, even if it's a rental car from a visitor, into town. So there's a benefit there. The point-to-point would be one where, let's say parking at LAX is whatever, $25, $30 a day, and you're a Santa Barbara traveler who knows you can fly out of LAX for cheaper, but you can take a point-to-point Zipcar. You can check out a Zipcar here, take it to Los Angeles, leave it at the airport, at the Zipcar station, pay nothing for parking, and have a Zipcar ready to come back. And it would be on, and I'm just using Zipcar as an example because they're doing this point-to-point program, but any program in the U.S. are all looking at this. Some have it in place, some are developing it. So it's another one of those tools that's enabling them to compete well. And again, the beauty of this situation for the city is that we don't need to worry about how successful they are. It's going to be up to them to have the right amount of cars to check with us per our ordinance and the Public Work Director authority to move the program up or down.
Thank you. Good answer. Mr. Hotchkiss.
Thank you, sir. Well, I think you may bring up some good questions. In fact, there are a lot of them. And this is a field of play that's changing daily, I think we could say. And how people use these things are going to be, that's going to be interesting. I know people now who rent a car here, drive to the airport, drop it off there for a day. It's cheaper to do that than just to take the bus down, for instance. So how this will play out, I have no idea. But I think it's a great experiment, if I can put it that way. And so long as we maintain control, I'm all for it. Would you foresee giving whatever company you choose a year or two? Okay, we have to have, be able to say yes or no on our side. Anyway, that's my suggestion, that we, the real thing is our control of this. It's kind of turning people loose, companies loose into the free market and saying, yes, we, like you, we don't know, we hope it works, but if it doesn't, we want to be able to say no. Anyway, so I would propose that we move forward with this ordinance as suggested in the notes here, and that's a motion, and if you'll second, then...
I'll second that motion with all due respect to Chair Rouse's reservations. Reducing parking congestion in the city is paramount to people who suffer from it. And let's give this a try. Thank you.
All right, very good. Now, I have just a couple other questions for staff before we go into the voting on the motion. Do you need this? Do you need this to move through council before you begin to negotiate with the car company? So we don't know yet what kind of charges we can levy for the monthly parking. I mean, is it anticipated that we're going to charge the same to the car share companies that we do to a monthly parker in one of our structures, for example?
Chair Rouse, council members, at this point the ordinance is silent, so you're not granting authority to let us go enter into a contract or with any car share organization. What will happen is we'll go through the request for proposal process. When staff selects one, they'll come back to you before we enter into a contract. So staff will negotiate the fines, and then there is citation fees that we will be putting in part of the city's fee resolution to address, instead of if it's not a tow-worthy violation, it'll be a citation violation.
Right. So all we're doing today is allowing the staff to go forward and initiate discussions. There's no numbers attached in terms of amount, nor rent, nor revenue.
Chair Rouse, that's correct. But for ballpark understanding, when I looked into the amounts being charged in other locations, the monthly rate in our garages was at the lower end of the spectrum that most car share companies are paying in most cities. So that gave us some comfort that if we charged our standard monthly amount, say in Lot 6 or Lot 10, that had capacity, that would be fairly easy for the car share company to deal with.
And those revenues would be put into the parking system?
That has yet to be determined. Obviously, some of that would go towards maintaining and administrating the program.
And then lastly, for a neighborhood, I think Mr. Hodgkin said, could somebody request those, but could a neighborhood... how would we determine within a residential neighborhood where they existed? Because some neighborhoods may be resistant to that very program. And I don't know if stakeholders are going to have much of a say in that, or if that's going to be a matter of a public hearing, or it's just staff does what we do.
Mr. Chair, I think that we weren't proposing a community process. We would put the cars in as a benefit to the residents. And again, if the benefit does not happen, in other words, the benefit would be people use the car. If that doesn't happen, then it's not viable for the car share company to have the car there in the first place. So they'll pull the car before the neighborhood's complaining about something they're not using. Does that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense. I just know that there are some neighborhoods that are sensitive to what they've got now. And I think they're going to be real sensitive if all of a sudden two car share, whether or not the program is successful or not, they're going to go, you just took two of our very valuable spaces away in a densely populated neighborhood.
Yeah, we'll have to be very careful to communicate why it's good for the neighborhood in terms of parking, freeing up on-street parking, and then also advertising its availability.
Once again, I've witnessed a lot of programs that did really well academically, then we put them on the ground and they didn't really come to fruition. So I'd rather not do that, but I do agree that this is something that should be looked at. And with that, if there's any other comments by staff, and then we'll...
I just clarify, I want to say, to read the way this reads, that the committee forward to council an introduction and ordinance of the council of the city of Santa Barbara, adding chapter blah, 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 to establish a car share vehicle permit program. Would that probably go on consent calendar, or does it have to be discussed?
Well, it'll be up to the city administrator, but I'd recommend that it be an administrative item for discussion.
Okay. Well, so that's my recommendation, or my motion.
Second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Unanimous. Thank you very much.